I woke up that Tuesday morning gasping for air, my chest tight as I reached for the oxygen tank beside my bed, only to realize it was nearly empty. The gauge showed red, and panic immediately set in because my backup tank had run out 2 days earlier. My medical supply company, Medicare Solutions out of Phoenix, Arizona, was supposed to deliver a fresh shipment that afternoon, and I was counting every breath until they arrived. My name is Lawson, and I have severe chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, a lovely parting gift from 20 years of working in construction before the dust finally caught up with me. At 52 years old, I never imagined I would be dependent on oxygen tanks just to make it through the day. But here I was, living in Sunridge Meadows, a planned community in Gilbert, Arizona, where the HOA rules apparently mattered more than human life. I had moved here 6 months ago, thinking the quiet suburban neighborhood would be perfect for my condition. Clean air, well-maintained streets, and friendly neighbors. What I did not account for was Patricia Whitmore, the HOA president who treated the community rulebook like it was the United States Constitution and the Bible combined. Patricia was everything you would expect from an HOA Karen, complete with the blonde highlighted bob haircut, designer athleisure where that she definitely did not exercise in, and an attitude that could curdle milk at 50 paces. By noon, I was rationing what little oxygen remained in my tank. I sat by the front window, watching for the Medicare Solutions truck, my breathing shallow and labored. My phone rang, and I answered to hear Jennifer from Medicare on the line. "Mr. Lawson, our driver Tom is about 15 minutes away from your location. He has your full oxygen delivery, including the portable tanks you requested," she said cheerfully. "Thank God," I wheezed into the phone. "I am running on empty here. He will be there soon, just hang tight." I hung up and continued my vigil by the window. True to Jennifer's word, about 12 minutes later, I saw the white Medicare Solutions van turn onto my street. Relief flooded through me. I watched as the van approached my driveway, and that was when I saw her. Patricia Whitmore came marching out of her house 3 doors down, wearing pink yoga pants and a white tank top, her face already set in that pinched expression of righteous indignation. The van began to pull into my driveway, but Patricia literally stepped in front of it, waving her arms like she was directing traffic at a major accident scene. I watched in disbelief as the driver stopped and rolled down his window. Even from inside my house, I could see Patricia gesticulating wildly, pointing at the van, then at some papers she had apparently brought with her, then at my house. I grabbed my nearly empty portable oxygen tank and made my way outside as quickly as my condition would allow. By the time I reached the driveway, Patricia was in full lecture mode. "This is a clear violation of Section 7, Paragraph 3 of the Sunridge Meadows HOA Covenant," she was saying, shaking a printed document at the confused driver. "Commercial vehicles are not permitted to park in residential driveways between the hours of 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. on weekdays." "Madam, I am just delivering medical equipment," the driver, a young guy who could not have been more than 25, said patiently. "I will be in and out in 10 minutes. The rules do not make exceptions," Patricia said firmly. "You will need to park on the street and transport the items from there." I finally reached them, my breathing ragged. "Patricia, what are you doing? This is my oxygen delivery. I need it right now." She turned to me with that fake sympathetic smile that did not reach her eyes. "Isaac, I understand you have medical needs, but we all have to follow the community rules. This is a commercial vehicle, and the HOA regulations are very clear. Commercial vehicles must park on the street, not in driveways during daytime hours." I can barely breathe, I said, my voice coming out in gasps. Just let him pull into my driveway for 10 minutes. Rules are rules, Patricia said, crossing her arms. If I make an exception for you, then everyone will want exceptions. What if the plumber wants to park in the driveway? Or the lawn service? Where does it end? Tom, the driver, looked between us with growing concern. Sir, are you okay? You do not look good. I am out of oxygen, I managed to say. That is why you are here. Tom made a decision. I am pulling into the driveway. This is a medical emergency. Patricia immediately stepped directly in front of the van. You will not. I am the HOA president, and I am telling you that you are in violation of community regulations. If you park in that driveway, I will have your vehicle towed, and I will report your company to the HOA board for enabling covenant violations. You cannot be serious, Tom said, his jaw dropping. This man needs oxygen. Then you can park on the street and bring it to him, Patricia said stubbornly. The street parking is right there. She pointed to the curb about 30 feet away. I felt dizzy, my vision starting to blur at the edges. Tom, just do what she says. Park on the street. I need that oxygen now. Tom looked like he wanted to argue more, but he saw my condition deteriorating and nodded. He backed the van out of my driveway and parked it on the street. Patricia stood in my driveway with her arms crossed, watching with satisfaction as Tom jumped out and opened the back of the van. The oxygen tanks I needed were heavy, stored in large cylinders that weighed about 40 pounds each. Tom had to bring in 3 of them, plus my smaller portable tanks. I watched him struggle with the first large tank, carrying it across the lawn, up my driveway, and to my front door. I had propped the door open and was sitting on my front step, trying not to pass out. Where do you want these, Mr. Lawson? Tom asked, setting the first tank down beside me. Living room, I gasped. Just inside. Tom rolled the tank inside and came back for the next one. Patricia remained in my driveway the entire time, like she was guarding it from invasion by commercial vehicles. Watching Tom make trip after trip, struggling with the heavy equipment, while I sat there barely able to breathe, and this woman just stood there enforcing her precious rules. By the time Tom got the first tank set up, and I had the oxygen flowing into my nasal cannula, I had been without adequate oxygen for almost 3 hours. My lips had a bluish tinge, and Tom looked genuinely frightened. Mr. Lawson, I think you need to go to the hospital, he said quietly as he brought in the second tank. You do not look right. I will be fine now, I said, though my voice was weak. Just get the rest of the tanks inside. It took Tom another 20 minutes to get everything delivered and set up properly. Normally, he could have done it in 10 minutes if he had been able to use my driveway like a normal human being. Patricia watched the entire operation from her post in my driveway, occasionally checking her phone. After Tom left, giving me one more concerned look and his card with a number to call if I needed anything, Patricia approached my front door where I was still sitting, recovering. Isaac, I hope you understand that I was just doing my job, she said in that condescending tone that made my blood pressure rise. The HOA rules exist to maintain property values and community standards. If we let people break the rules whenever they feel like it, chaos would ensue. I stared at her, oxygen hissing into my nose, my body still recovering from oxygen deprivation. You could have killed me. Do not be dramatic, she said, waving her hand dismissively. The oxygen got delivered, did it not? Everything worked out fine. I was without adequate oxygen for 3 hours because you would not let a medical delivery truck park in my driveway for 10 minutes, I said, my voice getting stronger as the oxygen helped me recover. You realize how insane that is? What is insane is thinking you are above the rules that everyone else has to follow, Patricia countered. You signed the HOA covenant when you bought your house. You agreed to follow the rules. The rules are supposed to serve the community, not endanger residents, I shot back. Patricia's expression hardened. I will be filing a report with the HOA board about this incident. Your medical supply company was in violation of community regulations, and as a homeowner, you are responsible for ensuring your guests and service providers comply with HOA rules. You will likely receive a fine. You are going to fine me because I needed oxygen. I could not believe what I was hearing. I am going to fine you because you allowed a commercial vehicle to be on your property in violation of covenant rules, she corrected. The van parked on the street, but your delivery driver crossed the lawn and driveway multiple times with commercial equipment. There are proper procedures for medical deliveries, and you did not follow them. What procedures? I demanded. You are supposed to submit a request to the HOA board at least 72 hours before any commercial delivery or service. The board then reviews the request and can grant temporary exemptions if deemed necessary, Patricia explained, like this was perfectly reasonable. I have a medical condition that requires regular oxygen deliveries. I cannot predict exactly when I will need them 72 hours in advance. This is healthcare, not a furniture delivery. Patricia shrugged. Then you should keep better track of your medical supplies. Plan ahead. That is what responsible homeowners do. She turned and walked back toward her house, leaving me sitting there, stunned and furious. I spent the rest of the day recovering from the oxygen deprivation, and the more I thought about what had happened, the angrier I became. This was not just about HOA rules. Patricia had actively endangered my life over a parking regulation. The next morning, I received an email from the Sunridge Meadows HOA board. It was a formal notice of violation, citing me for allowing unauthorized commercial activity on my property and failure to obtain proper permits for service vehicles. The fine was $500, payable within 30 days. If I did not pay, additional fines would accrue at $50 per day, and the HOA could place a lien on my property. I immediately called my real estate attorney, Marcus Chen, who had handled my house purchase. I explained the entire situation, my voice shaking with anger and residual fear from the previous day. Wait, let me make sure I understand this correctly, Marcus said slowly. You needed medical oxygen delivered because you have a documented chronic illness. The HOA president physically blocked the delivery truck from using your driveway, forcing the driver to park on the street and carry heavy medical equipment across your yard while you were experiencing respiratory distress. And now they are fining you for it. $500, plus they say I should have filed for permission 72 hours in advance for a medical delivery, I confirmed. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Isaac, I need you to document everything. Write down exactly what happened. Get a statement from the delivery driver if possible. Take photos of your oxygen equipment and your medical documentation. Do you have a doctor who can verify that delaying your oxygen delivery could have been life-threatening? Yes, doctor. Sarah Morrison at Gilbert Medical Center. She has been treating me since I moved here. Good. Contact her office and get a detailed letter about your medical condition and the necessity of uninterrupted oxygen access. This is not just about HOA overreach anymore. What Patricia did could potentially be considered reckless endangerment, Marcus explained. Can we fight the fine? I asked. We can do better than that. We can file a complaint with the Arizona Department of Real Estate, which oversees HOA regulations in the state. We might also have grounds for a civil lawsuit against the HOA and Patricia personally for endangering your health. But first, Let me review your HOA covenant and bylaws. Can you send me all that documentation? I spent the rest of that day gathering evidence. I called Medicare Solutions and spoke with Jennifer again, explaining what had happened. She was horrified and immediately agreed to have Tom write a statement about the incident. She also mentioned that Tom had filed an incident report with the company because he had been concerned about my condition. Mr. Lawson, in Tom's report, he noted that you appeared cyanotic. That means your lips and fingertips were turning blue from lack of oxygen. He wanted to call 911, but you insisted you would be fine once the oxygen was delivered, Jennifer told me. We have photos he took documenting the situation, including some showing the HOA president blocking your driveway. He took them because he was worried there might be liability issues. Can you send me copies of everything? I asked. I will need your written authorization, but yes, absolutely. What that woman did was unconscionable. Our drivers deliver to dozens of HOA communities around Phoenix, and we have never had anyone try to block a medical delivery before. Next, I called Dr. Morrison's office. Her nurse, Linda, put me through directly when I explained the situation. Isaac, this is extremely serious, Dr. Morrison said after I recounted the story. You know that your COPD is severe. Going without adequate oxygen for 3 hours could have caused permanent damage or even death. I am going to write a very detailed letter explaining your medical condition, your oxygen requirements, and the potential consequences of delayed delivery. I want you to come in tomorrow so I can examine you and document any effects from yesterday's incident. The appointment the next day revealed that my oxygen saturation levels were still slightly below my normal baseline, and Dr. Morrison noted signs of acute hypoxic stress. She documented everything meticulously, explaining that she might need to testify if this went to court. Armed with all this documentation, I sent everything to Marcus. He called me 2 days later with an update. Isaac, I have reviewed all the materials, and this is even worse than I thought. The HOA covenant does have a provision about commercial vehicles, but there is also a clause that specifically states HOA rules should be interpreted in a manner consistent with federal and state fair housing laws and the Americans with Disabilities Act. By preventing reasonable accommodation for your disability, the HOA violated federal law. So what do we do? I asked. First, I am going to file a formal response to the HOA disputing the fine on the grounds that it violates the ADA and fair housing laws. Second, I am going to request an emergency hearing before the HOA board to address this issue. Third, I am preparing a complaint to file with the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division and the Arizona Attorney General's office. Fourth, if the HOA does not back down, we are going to file a lawsuit. Marcus laid out the plan. That sounds expensive, I said worriedly. My disability payments and small pension did not leave much room for legal battles. Some of this I can do on a contingency basis because we would be seeking damages for the harm caused to you. Also, there are legal aid organizations that help with disability rights cases. Let me make some calls, Marcus assured me. While Marcus worked on the legal strategy, life in Sunridge Meadows became increasingly uncomfortable. Patricia apparently told other board members and neighbors her version of events, painting me as a troublemaker who thought I was above the rules. I started getting cold shoulders from people who had been friendly before. Someone left a printed copy of the HOA rules in my mailbox with the commercial vehicle section highlighted. Another neighbor, Richard something, stopped me while I was checking my mail. You know, we moved here because of the strict HOA rules, he said sanctimoniously. Property values stay high when everyone follows the rules. You should think about that. I needed medical oxygen. I was not throwing a party or running a business out of my garage, I replied tersely. Still, rules are rules, he said, echoing Patricia's favorite phrase. I was starting to understand why HOAs had such a terrible reputation. The emergency hearing Marcus requested was scheduled for 2 weeks out, which felt like an eternity. In the meantime, I had another oxygen delivery scheduled. This time, I submitted a formal request to the HOA board 72 hours in advance, explaining that I needed regular medical deliveries and requesting a permanent accommodation. Patricia responded personally to my request with a denial. Her email stated that permanent accommodations required a full board vote, which could not be scheduled until the regular monthly meeting in 3 weeks. For the upcoming delivery, she granted a one-time exception, but with conditions. The delivery truck could park in my driveway, but only for exactly 15 minutes, and I had to notify the HOA office 30 minutes before the truck arrived and 30 minutes after it left. Failure to comply would result in additional fines. It was bureaucratic nonsense designed to make my life difficult, but I complied. When the delivery was scheduled for the following Tuesday, I sent Patricia an email 30 minutes before the truck's arrival window. The delivery went smoothly, and Tom was relieved to be able to use the driveway normally. "That lady is not out here watching today," Tom noted as he rolled the tanks inside. "I had to jump through a dozen hoops and get special permission," I explained. Tom shook his head in disgust. "Man, I deliver medical equipment all over the valley. Gilbert, Scottsdale, Chandler, Phoenix. I have been doing this for 5 years. I have never, and I mean never, had anyone try to stop a medical delivery before. What happened to you is not normal." After Tom left, I dutifully sent Patricia another email confirming the delivery was complete. She responded with a curt acknowledgement and a reminder that this was a one-time exception, not a permanent accommodation. The emergency hearing finally arrived on a Thursday evening. The HOA board meetings were held in the community clubhouse, a nice facility with a pool, gym, and meeting room. Marcus accompanied me, carrying a briefcase full of documentation. When we arrived, Patricia was already there along with the other 4 board members. Donald Prescott, the vice president who was a retired accountant, Margaret Sullivan, the secretary who taught high school English, Robert Yates, the treasurer who worked in banking, and Karen, Brenda Thornton, a member at large who was a real estate agent. About 15 other residents were also present, apparently drawn by gossip about the controversial case. I recognized several of them as people who had given me cold shoulders over the past 2 weeks. Patricia called the meeting to order with officious formality. "We are here tonight for an emergency hearing requested by Isaac Lawson regarding a violation notice issued on October 10th. Mr. Lawson, you have 15 minutes to present your case." Marcus stood up. "I am Marcus Chen, attorney representing Mr. Lawson. Before we begin, I want to note for the record that this hearing is being recorded." He placed a digital recorder on the table. "I would also like to request that this board consider that they may be personally liable for any decisions that violate federal or state law." That got everyone's attention. Patricia's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Chen, this is an HOA matter, not a legal proceeding." "Actually, Mrs. Whitmore, this is very much a legal matter, as you will see," Marcus replied smoothly. He then proceeded to lay out the case methodically. He explained my medical condition, presented Dr. Morrison's letter detailing the severity of my COPD and my absolute medical necessity for uninterrupted oxygen access, showed the timeline of events from the day Patricia blocked the delivery truck and presented Tom's written statement along with photos documenting my cyanotic appearance. On October 9th, Mrs. Whitmore physically prevented a medical delivery vehicle from accessing Mr. Lawson's property, forcing a delay in critical medical equipment delivery, while Mr. Lawson was experiencing respiratory distress. This action violated the Americans with Disabilities Act, which requires that reasonable accommodations be made for individuals with disabilities. It also violated Arizona fair housing laws and potentially constitutes reckless endangerment under Arizona criminal statutes, Marcus stated clearly. Patricia's face was turning red. That is absurd. I was simply enforcing the HOA covenant that every homeowner signed. The HOA covenant cannot supersede federal law, Marcus countered. The ADA specifically requires that rules be interpreted to provide reasonable accommodations for disabilities. Allowing a medical delivery truck to use the resident's driveway is an extremely reasonable accommodation. Donald Prescott, the vice president, spoke up. I was not aware of the medical severity of the situation. Patricia, why did you not bring this to the board before issuing the violation notice? Patricia bristled. Because there is a clear rule about commercial vehicles. I was doing my job as HOA president. Isaac should have followed the proper procedures and requested an accommodation in advance. He could not predict in advance when he would need oxygen delivered. That is not how medical conditions work, Marcus said. And even if there was a procedural issue, the appropriate response would have been to grant the accommodation immediately due to the medical emergency, not to block access to life-saving medical equipment. Margaret Sullivan, the secretary, looked troubled. I have to say, I am very uncomfortable with what I am hearing. If one of our residents was in medical distress, our priority should have been helping them, not enforcing parking rules. That sets a dangerous precedent, Patricia argued. If we start making exceptions, everyone will claim some special circumstance. The rules keep our community orderly and our property values high. Robert Yates, the treasurer, leaned forward. Patricia, I think you are missing the point. This was not someone wanting to park an RV in their driveway or paint their house purple. This was a medical emergency. Of course, we should make accommodations for that. It was not an emergency, Patricia insisted. Isaac knew he was running low on oxygen. He should have planned better. Marcus pulled out another document. I have here the delivery records from Medicare Solutions. Mr. Lawson's deliveries are scheduled on a regular basis, but sometimes medical needs change. On October 9th, Mr. Lawson had been dealing with increased respiratory issues due to the poor air quality from dust storms we had that week. His oxygen consumption increased, requiring an earlier delivery than originally scheduled. This is a normal variation in chronic illness management, and exactly why rigid application of procedural rules to medical situations is inappropriate. The hearing continued for another hour, with Marcus systematically dismantling every argument Patricia made. He presented the HOA's own covenant language about following federal and state laws, showed examples of other Arizona HOAs being successfully sued for ADA violations, and explained the potential financial liability the board faced. Finally, Donald Prescott made a motion. I move that the violation notice and fine against Isaac Lawson be rescinded immediately. I further move that we grant Mr. Lawson a permanent accommodation allowing medical delivery vehicles to access his driveway as needed, with no advance notice required. Second, said Margaret Sullivan immediately. Patricia looked furious. I think this is a mistake. We are setting ourselves up for everyone to demand special treatment. Patricia, we are not voting on special treatment. We are voting on reasonable accommodation for a medical disability, which federal law requires, Robert Yates said firmly. All in favor? 4 hands went up: Donald, Margaret, Robert, and Brenda. Patricia sat with her arms crossed, the only dissenting vote. The motion passed 4-1. Marcus then continued. Thank you. I would also like to request that the board implement a formal policy for handling reasonable accommodation requests under the HOA and fair housing laws. This should include training for board members on their legal obligations. I have prepared a draft policy that I can submit for your review. Donald nodded. Please send that to our HOA management company, and we will review it at next month's regular meeting. As the hearing concluded, several residents approached me to apologize for their earlier coldness, saying they had not understood the full situation. Richard, the property values guy, notably avoided eye contact and left quickly. I thought that would be the end of it, but Patricia was not done. 2 days after the hearing, I found a notice taped to my front door. It was a new violation, this time citing me for having oxygen equipment visible through my front window, which allegedly violated the aesthetic standards of the community. The fine was $250. I took a photo of the notice and immediately sent it to Marcus, along with a picture of my living room window. You could barely see the oxygen concentrator unless you were specifically looking for it, and even then, it just looked like a small appliance. Marcus called me within an hour. This is harassment. She is retaliating against you for challenging her authority. We are done playing nice. I am filing a lawsuit against the HOA and Patricia Whitmore personally for disability discrimination, harassment, and emotional distress. Will that make things worse for me here? I asked worriedly. Probably in the short term, yes. But Isaac, this woman endangered your life and is now harassing you. If we do not stop her, she will make your life miserable. Plus, there might be other residents she has targeted who will come forward once they see someone standing up to her, Marcus explained. He was right. Within a week of the lawsuit being filed, which became public record, I was contacted by 3 other Sunridge Meadows residents. One was an elderly woman named Dorothy, who used a wheelchair, and had been fined for installing a ramp to her front door without HOA approval, even though the HOA specifically protects disability-related modifications. Another was a veteran named Carlos who had PTSD and had been cited for noise violations when his service dog barked. The third was a young mother named Amanda whose son had autism, and she had been denied permission to install a special sensory-friendly fence in her backyard. Marcus was excited about these additional cases. This shows a pattern of behavior. Patricia has been systematically discriminating against residents with disabilities. That strengthens our case significantly. The lawsuit moved forward through the legal system. Patricia and the HOA hired a law firm to defend them, and their initial response was to claim that all actions taken were proper enforcement of neutral HOA rules. But Marcus had documentation, witness statements, and medical records that painted a very different picture. Meanwhile, life in Sunridge Meadows was tense. Patricia continued to be cold and hostile, but the other board members were notably warmer toward me. Donald Prescott actually stopped by my house to apologize personally. I want you to know that most of us on the board had no idea Patricia was being so rigid about these issues. We trusted her to handle day-to-day management, and we did not oversee her closely enough. That is going to change, he said earnestly. We are implementing new procedures to ensure board members cannot unilaterally issue violations without review, especially in cases involving potential HOA or fair housing issues. I appreciate that, I told him. I did not move here looking for a fight. I just want to live peacefully and manage my health condition. I understand. And for what it is worth, several of us on the board have been discussing whether Patricia should continue as president. Her actions have exposed the HOA to significant legal liability, Donald said carefully. That conversation proved prophetic. At the next regular HOA board meeting in November, there was a motion to remove Patricia as president. The meeting was packed with residents, many of whom had apparently grown tired of her authoritarian approach to HOA management. The vote was 3-2 to remove her as president, with Patricia and one ally voting against. Donald Prescott was elected as the new president. Patricia remained on the board as a regular member, but her power was significantly curtailed. She looked absolutely furious during the entire meeting, her face pinched and red. After the vote, she stood up and gave a dramatic speech about how the community was going to fall apart without her leadership, and how property values would plummet when chaos reigned. Most people just looked uncomfortable or rolled their eyes. The lawsuit continued into early 2026. The HOA's insurance company was handling their defense, and it became clear they were worried about the case. Marcus told me their attorneys had reached out about a potential settlement. They are offering to pay your legal fees, rescind all violations and fines, pay you $25,000 in damages, and implement mandatory ADA training for all board members, Marcus explained. What do you think? What about the other residents Patricia targeted? I asked. Dorothy, Carlos, Amanda. They want to include them in the settlement too. Each of them would receive $15,000, and their violations would also be rescinded. Plus, the HOA would pay for Dorothy's wheelchair ramp modifications to bring them up to code, and they would approve Carlos's service dog and Amanda's fence, Marcus said. It seemed like a good resolution, but I had one more question. Does Patricia face any personal consequences? Marcus hesitated. That is where it gets complicated. The insurance company is willing to settle the claims against the HOA, but Patricia's personal liability is separate. We could continue the lawsuit against her individually, but that would mean more time, more stress, and an uncertain outcome. She does not have the resources the HOA does, so even if we win, collecting damages would be difficult. I thought about it carefully. What I really want is to make sure she cannot do this to anyone else. Is there a way to include in the settlement that she has to resign from the board entirely? I can ask, but that is tricky because she is an elected board member. The HOA cannot force her to resign as part of a settlement. However, I can make the settlement contingent on significant governance reforms that would limit her ability to unilaterally enforce rules, Marcus suggested. We went back and forth with the HOA's attorneys for another month. The final settlement, reached in late January 2026, included everything previously offered plus a comprehensive reform of the HOA's governance procedures. The new rules required that any violation notice be reviewed by at least 2 board members before being issued, created a formal process for reasonable accommodation requests that had to be responded to within 48 hours, and established an appeals process for violations that involved medical or disability issues. Patricia was not forced to resign, but the other board members made it clear she was not welcome. She stopped attending meetings in February and eventually submitted her resignation in March, claiming she was moving to Nevada to be closer to her daughter. I suspected the real reason was that she could not stand having her authority checked and her actions questioned. The day the settlement check arrived, I invited Marcus over to my house to celebrate. We sat in my living room, oxygen concentrator humming quietly in the background, and had coffee. You know, when this started, I just wanted to receive my medical oxygen without harassment, I reflected. I never imagined it would turn into a federal lawsuit and force an entire HOA to reform. That is how change happens, Marcus said. Someone has to be willing to stand up and fight, even when it is hard and scary. You did not just help yourself. You helped Dorothy, Carlos, Amanda, and probably future residents who will benefit from these new protections. I guess that is true, I acknowledged. It still feels surreal. I keep expecting Patricia to show up and cite me for something ridiculous. Marcus laughed. I think you are safe now, and if she ever comes back and tries something, you have me on speed dial. Life in Sunridge Meadows gradually returned to normal over the following months. The new HOA board under Donald Prescott's leadership was reasonable and focused on actual community improvement rather than petty rule enforcement. They organized neighborhood events, improved the common areas, and created a welcoming atmosphere. I got to know Dorothy, Carlos, and Amanda better. Dorothy was a firecracker of a woman in her 70s who did not let her wheelchair slow her down. She hosted a monthly book club that I started attending. Carlos became a good friend, and we would often sit on my back patio in the evenings, talking about his time in the Army and my construction days. Amanda's son, Tyler, was a sweet kid who loved coming over to see my collection of old construction photos and tools. My health remained stable with regular oxygen deliveries, which now occurred without any drama or interference. Medicare Solutions continued to provide excellent service, and Tom always made a point to ask how I was doing and if I had any more trouble with the HOA. He seemed genuinely invested in my well-being after everything that had happened. One Saturday in April, I was working in my front yard, doing some light gardening, when a moving truck pulled up to Patricia's house. I watched as movers loaded furniture and boxes. Patricia emerged from the house, saw me watching, and for a moment, we made eye contact. I expected her to look angry or defiant, but instead she just looked tired and defeated. She got into her car without saying anything and drove away. That was the last time I saw Patricia Whitmore. A young couple with a toddler moved into her house a month later. They were friendly and outgoing, the kind of neighbors who would wave and chat when you saw them outside. The husband, Jason, mentioned to me that they had specifically chosen Sunridge Meadows because they heard the HOA had recently reformed and become more reasonable. Apparently, word had spread in the local real estate market about the changes. We looked at a lot of HOA communities, but so many of them have these horror stories about power-tripping board members, Jason told me while we were both getting our mail one day. When our realtor told us about the reforms here and the new policies protecting homeowners, it made us feel a lot better about buying here. It was ironic that Patricia's worst fear, that relaxing strict rule enforcement would hurt property values, had not come true. If anything, the community was more desirable now that it had reasonable governance and legal protections for residents. In June, the HOA board invited me to speak at the annual meeting about my experience and the importance of the new accommodation policies. I was nervous about public speaking, but I felt it was important to share my story. The clubhouse was full of residents, and I stood at the front with my portable oxygen tank beside me. 6 months ago, I almost died because someone thought HOA parking rules were more important than my ability to breathe, I began, my voice steady despite my nerves. I am not sharing this to embarrass anyone or to relitigate the past. I am sharing this because I want every person in this room to understand that HOA rules exist to serve the community, not the other way around. When rules become more important than people's health, safety, and basic human dignity, something has gone very wrong. I talked about the fear I felt watching Patricia block my oxygen delivery. the humiliation of being fined for needing medical equipment, and the isolation of having neighbors treat me like a troublemaker for simply trying to survive. But I also talked about the positive changes that had resulted, the new policies protecting residents, and the more collaborative atmosphere in the community. I am grateful to the current board for their leadership in implementing these reforms, I concluded. And I want to encourage all of you to remember that we are not just homeowners in an HOA. We are neighbors. We are a community. Let us treat each other with compassion and common sense, not just rigid adherence to rules. The applause was warm and sustained. Several people came up to me afterward to thank me for speaking and to share their own concerns about HOA overreach in their previous communities. It felt good to know that something positive had come from such a difficult experience. As summer arrived and the Arizona heat became intense, I spent most of my time indoors in air conditioning, which was better for my lungs anyway. My oxygen deliveries continued like clockwork, always without incident. Tom and I had developed a friendly rapport, and he told me that Medicare Solutions had actually used my case as a training example for their drivers about knowing their rights when dealing with HOAs and standing up for patients' medical needs. "You are kind of famous in our company," Tom told me during a delivery in July. "Everyone knows about the HOA president who tried to block a medical delivery. It has made all of us more aware of advocating for our patients." I never intended to become famous for almost suffocating because of an HOA Karen, I joked, but I was glad that some good had come from it. In August, I received an unexpected call from a reporter at the Arizona Republic newspaper. She had heard about my case through public court records and wanted to do a story about HOA overreach and disability rights. I was hesitant at first, not wanting to relive the experience or attract more attention, but Marcus encouraged me to do it. "Your story illustrates a much bigger problem with how some HOAs operate," Marcus said. "If telling your story helps even one person in a similar situation stand up for their rights, it is worth it." I agreed to the interview, and the article ran in mid-September. It was a well-written piece that covered not just my experience, but also interviewed Dorothy, Carlos, and Amanda. It included comments from disability rights advocates and HOA reform activists. The article sparked quite a bit of discussion online and in local community forums. The attention brought unexpected consequences. I was contacted by a state legislator who was interested in introducing legislation to strengthen protections for HOA residents with disabilities and create clearer guidelines for reasonable accommodations. I ended up testifying before a legislative committee in October, sharing my story with state lawmakers. "HOAs serve an important function in many communities," I told the committee, "but they need clear legal guidelines to prevent the kind of abuse that happened to me. No one should have to choose between following HOA rules and accessing life-saving medical care." The proposed legislation was still working its way through the state legislature, as 2026 drew to a close, but I was hopeful it would pass and provide better protections for Arizona residents living in HOA communities. As for my own life, I had finally found peace in Sunridge Meadows. My health was as stable as it could be given my condition. I had good friends in the neighborhood. The HOA was well managed and reasonable. My house had become a true home, not a battleground. On a cool evening in late November, I sat on my back patio with Carlos, Dorothy, and Amanda, along with a few other neighbors who had become friends. We were having an early Thanksgiving gathering, sharing food and conversation. My oxygen concentrator was plugged in nearby, its quiet hum a constant reminder of my dependence on it, but no longer a source of anxiety. "You know what I am most thankful for this year," Dorothy said, raising her glass of wine. "I am thankful for Isaac having the courage to stand up to Patricia and fight for all of us. This community is so much better now." "Hear, hear," Carlos agreed, and everyone joined in the toast. I felt emotion welling up in my chest, and not from the copt for once. "I am thankful for all of you. When this started, I felt so alone. Having your support and friendship made all the difference." "You were never alone," Amanda said warmly. "You just did not know we were here yet." As the evening continued and the conversation flowed, I reflected on the wild journey of the past year. It had started with a terrifying moment of Patricia blocking my oxygen delivery, and escalated into a legal battle, an HOA board upheaval, a settlement, media attention, and ultimately legislative testimony. Through it all, I had learned that standing up for yourself, even when it is hard and scary, matters. Not just for you, but for everyone who comes after you. The next oxygen delivery was scheduled for the following week, and I knew it would arrive without incident. Tom would pull into my driveway, roll the tanks into my house, chat for a few minutes, and leave. Simple, normal, the way it should have been from the beginning. But getting to this point had required fighting through bureaucracy, legal systems, and one very determined HOA Karen who thought parking rules were more important than human life. In the end, common sense and basic human decency had prevailed, but it had taken months of stress, thousands of dollars in legal fees, and a tremendous amount of effort from many people. The experience had changed me in ways I had not expected. I had become an advocate, not just for myself, but for others with disabilities facing discrimination. I had learned about the legal system, about HOA governance, and about the power of standing up for what is right. I had also learned about community in the truest sense. Not the artificial community created by HOA rules and regulations, but the real community built on mutual support, understanding, and compassion. The friends gathered on my patio that evening were my community, and no HOA president or rulebook could change that. As Thanksgiving approached and I prepared to host dinner at my house for the first time since moving to Arizona, I felt genuinely grateful. Grateful for my health, imperfect as it was. Grateful for my home, despite the rocky start. Grateful for my friends and neighbors who had stood by me. Grateful for Marcus and his legal expertise. Grateful for Tom and Medicare Solutions. Grateful for the reformed HOA board that actually cared about residents. And yes, even grateful for Patricia Whitmore in a strange way, because her actions had catalyzed positive change that would benefit people for years to come. The day before Thanksgiving, I received one final piece of mail related to the whole ordeal. It was a formal letter from the Arizona Department of Real Estate, informing me that they had completed their investigation into the Sunridge Meadows HOA and found violations of state regulations regarding reasonable accommodations. The HOA had been fined and was required to implement additional compliance measures. The letter thanked me for bringing the matter to their attention and noted that my complaint had led to a broader review of HOA practices statewide. I filed the letter away in the folder I had created for all the documentation from the case. It was thick now, filled with medical records, legal filings, correspondence, and news articles. It was a record of one man's fight against an unjust system, and while I hoped I would never need to reference it again, I kept it as a reminder. A reminder that individuals can make a difference. A reminder that laws and rights only matter if people are willing to stand up and defend them. A reminder that sometimes the most important battles are fought not on grand stages, but in suburban driveways over something as simple as the right to breathe. Thanksgiving dinner was wonderful. My small house was filled with laughter, good food, and genuine warmth. We did not talk about HOAs or legal battles. We just enjoyed each other's company, shared stories, and celebrated our blessings. It was exactly the kind of peaceful, normal life I had hoped for when I moved to Sunridge Meadows. As I said grace before the meal, thanking God for the food, the friends, and the second chance at life that modern medicine and oxygen therapy had given me, I felt a profound sense of peace. The fight was over. The changes had been made. Life could finally just be life again, without drama, without legal battles, without Karen standing in my driveway preventing me from receiving life-saving medical care. The oxygen concentrator hummed quietly in the corner, doing its job, keeping me alive, completely unremarkable and uncontroversial, exactly as it should be. And in that moment, surrounded by friends in my own home, breathing freely thanks to medical equipment that arrived without incident, I realized that I had won something far more valuable than a legal settlement. I had won back my peace of mind, my sense of security, and my faith in the fundamental decency of most people. Patricia Whitmore had tried to make my life miserable over parking rules and aesthetic standards, but in the end, she had actually given me a gift, though not the one she intended. She had given me the opportunity to stand up for myself and others, to effect real change, and to build genuine connections with my neighbors through shared struggle. She had given me a purpose beyond just managing my illness and passing time. She had made me an advocate, and that was something I would carry forward for the rest of my life. As winter settled over Arizona, bringing cooler temperatures and clearer skies, I finally felt at home in Sunridge Meadows. The community had transformed from a place of stress and conflict into a genuine neighborhood. Children played in the streets. Neighbors waved and stopped to chat. The HOA board focused on actual improvements like fixing playground equipment and organizing social events, rather than issuing violation notices for minor infractions. I continued to receive my oxygen deliveries every few weeks, each one a quiet affirmation that the battle had been worth fighting. Tom became more than just my delivery driver. He became a friend who would sometimes stay for coffee after making his delivery. We would talk about his college classes. He was studying to become a respiratory therapist, and about my experiences that had inspired him to pursue health care. Dorothy hosted her book club at my house one month, and I discovered a love of reading that I had neglected during my working years. Carlos and I started a tradition of watching football games together on Sundays, and Amanda's son Tyler adopted me as an honorary grandfather, visiting regularly to hear stories about the old days of construction work before modern safety regulations. Life, in other words, had become beautifully ordinary, and after everything I had been through, ordinary felt like the greatest victory of all. No more HOA Karens blocking my driveway. No more violation notices for needing medical equipment. No more fighting just to survive in my own home. Just life, simple and peaceful, exactly as it should be.